The mess hall glowed under bright lights, laughter and chatter bouncing off the steel beams overhead. It was one of those rare evenings when ranks blended, and Marines, both officers and enlisted, gathered to share drinks, food and war stories. Medals glittered on dress uniforms. Boots shined as if they had just been polished, and the sound of camaraderie filled the room. Into that din stepped a figure who drew little attention at first. A young woman slipped into the hall wearing her neatly pressed uniform, quiet and composed. She carried herself with discipline, but without the kind of bravado others wore, like a second skin. She moved to the side, content to observe, her gaze sweeping calmly across the room. A group of officers noticed her. Among them, a colonel, tall and broad, with years of authority etched into his voice and a drink lazily twirling in his hand. He spotted her and smirked. She wasn't one he recognized. He had made a career of knowing nearly everyone worth knowing. "You there," he called, his voice booming low enough to hush the closest circle of men. "Haven't seen you around. What's your unit?" She straightened instinctively and answered respectfully, her tone even and professional. But her short reply didn't satisfy him. The colonel let out a chuckle, lifting his glass to his lips as he leaned back. "Young Marines these days, always so serious. Tell me then." His eyes narrowed playfully, but there was an edge beneath it. "What's your call sign?" At those words, the group nearby perked up. Call signs in the Marine Corps weren't just identifiers. They were reputations, carved through combat, missions, or the quirks of survival. A call sign carried weight, and the way his question snapped through the air was intentional. There was expectation there, maybe even a challenge. A lieutenant chuckled under his breath. "Probably doesn't even have one worth remembering." Another sipped his drink, smirking. "Yeah, let's hear it. Could be rookie, or maybe shadow for blending in the back." The colonel grinned at their comments, looking back at her as if the joke had already been written. His glass tipped slightly in his hand, the ice clinking softly. "So, Marine," he pressed, his voice rising so more could hear. "What do they call you out there?" The laughter bubbled softly, the air thick with anticipation of a punchline that would make her shrink. But she didn't flinch. She met his gaze steadily, her shoulders squared with quiet confidence. And though she hadn't spoken yet, something in her eyes said that when she did, the room would not laugh. The room would silence itself. The laughter swirled around her like smoke, light at first but edged with cruelty. The older Marines leaned in expectantly, waiting for her to stumble, waiting for the name she'd say to confirm their suspicions that she wasn't anyone worth remembering. The colonel tilted his glass, watching her intently, the faintest grin tugging the corner of his mouth. "Don't keep us waiting, Marine. Call signs don't hide. What do they call you?" For a heartbeat, the room hushed. Conversations dipped as curiosities turned her way. She stood still, every thread of her uniform precise, her chin level, her breathing even. Then, without hesitation, her voice broke through the noise, calm and firm. "Phantom 7! The sound froze the air. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't proud. It was a simple declaration, delivered with the weight of fact. The ripple it created, however, was immediate. The chuckles hiccuped into silence. The smirks faltered. Nearby, Marines blinked, turning their heads as though they hadn't heard correctly, and the colonel. His glass slipped slightly in his hand, his bravado cracking as ice struck liquid with a faint clink. "What did you say?" His voice, once booming and confident, came hushed now, careful. Her eyes didn't move. She repeated, steady as stone. "Phantom 7, sir." A murmur ran through the crowd. Names passed quickly from mouth to mouth like wildfire. "Phantom 7? Did she say Phantom 7? Everyone knew of it. The call sign wasn't obscure, wasn't new. It belonged to a shadow, a story told in whispers, missions that had broken the odds. A Black Hawk extraction behind, enemy lines that ended in 0 casualties when survival had been deemed impossible. A sniper team saved from ambush after the unseen arrival of a lone operator. Movement so quiet that even allies sometimes didn't realize she had been there until the mission was already complete. No one had put a face to Phantom 7, not really. The tales were almost myth, as though the Marine Corps itself had conjured her ghost as a symbol. But now, here she stood, quiet, unassuming, not asking for recognition but claiming what was already hers. The colonel's smile had vanished. His jaw tightened. His fingers clenched more firmly around his glass to cover the slip of his nerves. He looked at her not with mockery anymore, but with something rare in him: recognition. And as the silence thickened around the room, the Marines who had chuckled a moment ago found themselves staring, their eyes widening as the truth sank in. The quiet Marine wasn't nobody. She was someone whose shadow they had all been living under, and now they knew her by name. The mess hall, which moments earlier had been filled with laughter, shifted into silence so sharp it felt heavy. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations cut mid-sentence. All attention was on her, the quiet Marine who had, in a single breath, named herself Phantom 7. At first it felt impossible to the group listening. The name carried the weight of shadowy legends. Young recruits whispered the call sign during long nights on base, convincing each other the stories must be exaggerated, maybe even fabricated. Yet the older ones, the ones who had seen duty in the most unforgiving places of the world, had never laughed at the tales. Phantom 7? One Marine muttered, his eyes wide. It can't be her. But the murmurs climbed quickly, stories hissing like sparks from flint. They say Phantom 7 flew a helicopter under blackout conditions. No lights, no sound, and pulled out a trapped squad before dawn. Wasn't there a mission in Kandahar? The one where they said an entire convoy survived because Phantom tipped them off ahead of ambush? Yeah, and the one about the high-value target in the mountains. She ghosted right in, ghosted out, clean. Nobody ever saw her, but the job got done. Every eye swung back toward her, drinking in the sight of someone they had imagined to be untouchable, faceless. She did not glow with the arrogance of the stories they told. She stood calm, steady, almost modest in her presence. The colonel, however, was a different sight. His hand twitched against his glass, knuckles whitening as he tried not to betray his shock. His once gloating smirk was gone, replaced by an expression tight with disbelief. This wasn't just another Marine, some rookie he could dismiss. This was a Marine whose name commanded silence, even among generals. "You're Phantom 7?" he asked again, his voice lacking the edge of the tease it had carried moments earlier. The young woman's answer was simple. "Yes, sir." There was no need for more. No list of achievements, no defense. Her call sign itself was the defense, a weapon heavier than any rifle in the room. The surrounding Marines shifted. Some straightened reflexively, their posture correcting to respect. Others looked down, ashamed they had laughed. The arrogance melted into awe, the hall thick with the weight of her unspoken record. The colonel's throat worked as if swallowing a stone. He looked down at his glass, then set it on the table carefully before his trembling fingers betrayed him. For the first time in years, the man who barked at battle-hardened soldiers now found himself speechless, because in front of him wasn't a rookie, it was a legend. The air in the mess hall was different now. What had begun as cocky banter and smug laughter had been crushed into a heavy silence. Every Marine in the room felt the shift. It wasn't fear. It was respect, reverence that none of them could explain away. The colonel cleared his throat and straightened, his bravado gone. When he finally spoke, his voice was steadier but quieter than usual. "Phantom 7!" Even repeating the name felt like a concession. For years he had told stories of leadership, of commanding in battle, of making decisions under fire. But here, in front of him, was someone whose record eclipsed his own. Someone whose actions were spoken of in whispers, even in places where medals did the talking. He lowered his gaze for a moment, then lifted his posture again. But this time he didn't puff his chest. He raised his hand slowly in a crisp salute. It wasn't forced. It wasn't out of obligation. It was earned. One by one, others followed. Chairs scraped lightly against the floor as Marines rose to their feet, saluting the quiet soldier at the center of the storm. The very ones who had laughed hardest only minutes ago now stood stiff and attentive, their eyes focused and lips tightly pressed, their smirks erased. The young woman didn't gloat. She didn't smile, didn't revel in having silenced them. She simply returned the salute, her expression as steady as it had been from the first moment. To her, this wasn't a performance or a victory. It was who she was, and all she had ever done was live her duty without fanfare. The colonel dropped his arm eventually, his eyes weighing her with something unfamiliar for him: humility. "Forgive my tone earlier," he said quietly. "I should have known better." Her words were simple, firm, and almost merciful. Respect isn't about knowing who someone is, sir. It's about showing it to everyone, whether you think they've earned it or not. That truth lingered, like a blade in the air. Every Marine in the hall swallowed it, knowing it was aimed at not just the colonel, but at all of them. Respect, unconditional, unhesitating, wasn't given after you discovered someone's reputation. It was supposed to be given from the start. The colonel nodded, ashamed but acknowledging the lesson. She turned slowly, stepping back to the seat she had held in silence before all of it began. But no Marine in that hall ever looked at her the same again. And as the whispers of Phantom 7 spread like fire long after she left the room, the message remained clear: never underestimate the quiet ones. For shadows often carry giants, and the phantoms you dismiss might be the legends who keep you alive.